Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Hyun Koo. I'm a partner at March Capital, where I lead our e-commerce enablement strategy. Thanks for joining us. We're here today to discuss the intersection of AI and commerce, arguably two of the biggest topics in each of the last 2 years. And to kick it off, I thought it'd be appropriate to start with a joke ChatGPT wrote about AI and commerce, and it goes something like this. Why did AI cross the road? To get to the e-commerce store on the other side of the road. Clearly far from great, but we have brought here the best founders and CEOs who are solving mission-critical problems within commerce using AI, each in their unique ways. And I'd like to start off maybe going down the line with a quick introduction and one-liner, or one or two, Connor, on what your business is doing.
Cool. I'll try to keep it to two. I've been working on this all morning. My name's Connor. I started a company called Disco about 2.5 years ago. We are a collaborative commerce platform that connects brands to each other to connect better with consumers. We have a few products. The first product that you might have seen is after you check out on one of our partner brands, you'll see complimentary recommendations to other brands. But what lives behind that is a really interesting data layer and data set that we've built and understanding what consumers might find interesting next. So Disco stands for discovery, and that's what we do.
Great. Hi, I'm David Pollet. I'm with Tradeswell. Tradeswell is a decision engine for e-commerce, and we focus predominantly on helping large enterprise brands create incremental growth and ROI.
Yeah, I'm Richard Harris. I'm the founder of Black Crow AI. All we do is artificial intelligence, and we deliver a Fortune 500 grade AI stack to companies of any size, even small e-commerce companies. It's one click to install, and it costs less than one data scientist annually.
Awesome. I'm Brian Lee. I'm co-founder and CEO of arenaclub.com. We are an online digital marketplace for collectibles, mostly in the trading card category. We also grade cards as well.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to start with a little bit of context of where we are in the e-commerce market. Obviously after a boom in 2021, the market did a complete 180 in 2022, where headlines were dominated by a few things, including rising inflation, shifting consumer preferences, and more strict privacy controls. But despite that, e-commerce volume topped $1 trillion last year, which is quite impressive. Brian, I'd like to start with you. You look shocked. You're a Forex entrepreneur, having co-founded LegalZoom during the dot-com bubble, ShoeDazzle during the financial crisis, and The Honest Company, and now Arena Club during the tech downturn in 2022, and NFT and blockchain, no less. And so talk to us about your journey on starting Arena Club, and specifically why now?
Sure. So I think downturns are the perfect time to start a company for a myriad of reasons. Mostly because, number one, there's a lot more talent available. Number two, less competition coming into the space. And three, just taking advantage of these new technologies that are constantly being improved upon. But in terms of Arena Club, really it was, I've been collecting cards, baseball cards, my whole life, and I just thought I could make a better marketplace using blockchain and AI. And so that's kind of what we set out to build. Jesse, my co-founder, is here, and Derek Jeter is my other co-founder. And so we launched about 5 months ago in beta, and it's doing well. The concept is pretty simple. You send us a card, we digitize it, vault the physical card, and the digital version we put on blockchain and put into online showrooms, and you can buy, sell, and trade that asset-backed NFT, I guess you could call it, very seamlessly. So that was the concept behind Arena Club, but we use a lot of machine learning, computer vision on the grading side of the marketplace. So we don't have any raw cards in the marketplace. Everything is authenticated and graded. And we use machine learning, computer vision, AI to grade cards, as opposed to the existing card grading companies are doing it kind of the old way, where humans right? So they have like a microscope and a light, and they're sitting there grading cards. But we kind of took we're taking the human element out of grading.
Great. And Richard, you work with many of the leading direct-to-consumer brands like Skims and Liquid IV. And so can you give us a sense of what conversations with these brands day-to-day look like? Said another way, what does the market look like from their perspective?
Yeah, sure. So what we hear a lot, what we see a lot is sort of the business as usual model has kind of blown up over the last, call it 18 months. And it means that sort of everything is being questioned and re-questioned. I think the biggest swing we're seeing is, for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, right? Like the inflation and gas prices caused a softening of consumer demand. Investors have sort of backed off brand building quite substantially versus where they were just a couple of years ago. And so that's meant that there's a huge swing from growth being the number one metric inside of these companies to sort of profit and sustainability being the number one concern. And so, it's when business as usual blows up, everything's kind of on the table. You see that particularly in every segment of the CAC LTV equation, right? Where these D2C brands, they live and die by the CAC LTV equation. And so if your model for acquiring customers breaks down, right, and the value of having brought a customer in front of your product is suddenly a lot lower than it was, everything needs to be rethought. And I think you can't discount the fact that Tim Cook is trying to punch Mark Zuckerberg in the balls every single day. That is really impact. Are you allowed to say balls?
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
Okay,
Everything's fair game.
I just said it twice. So.
Yeah.
I just said it twice. No, but I mean that is really impacting the growth playbook for many, many brands, and so they're looking for new solutions. And we'll talk more about AI, but it's all about data.
Great.
Yeah.
And in the commerce world, one signal in the market to gauge the strength of the ecosystem is by looking at Shopify's growth. And between March 2020 and January 2023, the number of Shopify stores more than quadrupled, and the number of apps in the ecosystem almost tripled to 8,000. And so, Connor, I'd like to get your thoughts. Disco was started with the idea of forming partnerships between brands to reduce dependence on major tech platforms, such as Shopify. And so, talk to us about maybe the power of Shopify and whether you think that's a good or bad thing for the ecosystem.
Yeah, totally. So, disclaimer, Shopify is an investor in Disco, and we're very close to that team. I think that I put Shopify actually in a completely different bucket than I put other tech platforms, and that's because it's actually open by nature. It's not a walled garden. When you look at Facebook and Google and Amazon, they're taking all of the signal they get from all of the brands, and they're using that to create value for themselves. Of course, they give value to the brands as well, or they wouldn't use them. But Shopify is very different. And I worked at Facebook for 6 years, so I can say that pretty confidently, that Facebook is not a partner-centric company and is very much in the mindset that it can do pretty much anything it wants itself. Having worked there, they even build their own calendar tool. They don't use Google or G Suite. So there's a totally different and fundamental attitude and behavior towards customers and towards the partner ecosystem than Shopify. Shopify has made it really easy for companies like mine and even BlackRow and really anyone to tap into this merchant ecosystem and to grow their network and their data set and their capability really quickly by taking away all of the pain that exists in manual integrations with every single one of the merchants. So in 2.5 years, we've gone from 0 to over 1,000 merchants, and I just don't think that there's a world where that would have been possible even 5 years ago without the advancements of Shopify, BigCommerce, WooCommerce. And you're starting to see a lot of these large brands. I'm good friends with the founder of Everlane, and there's you just saw Glossier move back to Shopify. You see really big brands that were starting to think about, in 10 years ago, that it was really important that they built their own tech stack, that they built all of their own stuff. realizing, kind of too late that they're not tech companies and that they really should lean on the tech ecosystem to help fill those gaps. So in general, I think of Shopify very differently when I think of the other big dogs of being reliant on.
Yeah, good. And Dave, Tradeswell value prop grows with increasing number of platforms, channels, and consumer touch points. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the overview of complexity that merchants are dealing with today and how your engine helps solve that.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's funny that we started with Shopify. When we first built this, we had this vision that merchants would really struggle to integrate across all of the different available sales channels. And what we discovered was DTCs on Shopify had no interest at all in going to Amazon or any of the marketplaces. And then when you looked at the brands, they were mostly Amazon only, and they were mostly outsourcing. In fact, there were a lot of models where they would sell wholesale. And so we ended up first having to solve problems for the wholesalers to manage the brands. And then over the course of the last 2.5 years, now what you see is virtually every DTC is not only has migrated from the Shopifys of the world into multiple marketplaces. Most of the brands are in multiple marketplaces. You have new business models like Instacart having actually huge impact. Yeah. And then you have retail media. Retail media, which brings the transaction incredibly close to the media, grew to $50 billion in 5 years. To give you sort of some context, your old company, it took 11 years, and it took Google 15 years to get to that scale. Retail media opportunities are proliferating like rabbits on Valentine's Day, right? And brands have to integrate all of that, pull it in and make sense of it. They're struggling to get the data in. They are nowhere near standing up the machine learning architecture and being able to provide business decisions at the rate at which consumers transact.
So interesting. And quickly shifting gears to AI, which everyone knows has really taken off in the last 12 months, going from just an acronym to a top business priority. And as the tech develops, the impact it can have across your organization and the industries becomes clearer, especially in commerce as a tool to drive efficiency and profitability. And Richard, just at a high level, give us your take on the AI market and I guess putting a commerce lens on it, why brands should pay attention.
Sure. So I think, my quick take is we're in another hype cycle at the moment. Generative, ChatGPT, images, video, et cetera. And there will, of course, be, I think, legitimate applications for e-commerce, particularly on the marketing side of things and creative usage. I don't think that's the reason brands should pay attention. These things will absolutely be useful. But I think brands should pay attention because AI does and has been for some time solving problems that matter, right? And I think particularly, again, leaving generative aside, we'll see where those go. We'll see where that goes, and it will be helpful in creative, the creative side of commerce. But if you go back to good old-fashioned AI, which I'm talking about AI from like August, that is really about making sense of the massive quantities of data that companies produce, right? Including e-commerce companies. And I think the reason brands should pay attention is that like the competitive war between brands is being fought using data, and there is a war about data happening, right, between Apple and Facebook and Google. And this war is happening not for privacy, not because Apple loves you so much or because Facebook cares about you. It's literally a battle over who owns identity. Yeah. And so brands are becoming the victims of that battle happening. But you need to care. I think ultimately for brands it means, for commerce companies it means, you need to get your data house in order. You need to use all of the first-party data that you have and own, whether you've used it in the past, whether you think you can use it. And in many cases, it feels like there's too much of this data. It's unharnessable. AI is built to do that. And so I guess the message really is you should care because it knocks down the most important, billion-dollar migraine problems in the industry, from customer acquisition to retention to sales optimization, supply chain and logistics. All of these things are solvable by getting your data house in order with ML.
Yep. And Brian, typically when a company is trying to displace an old way of doing things, there are some bumps along the way. And talk a bit about the advantage of applying AI in collectible authentication, and what are some of the hurdles you faced or are facing?
I mean, there's so many hurdles implementing some of this new technology into our platform. At the end of the day, it really is about enhancing user engagement, right, for all these consumer sites as well as our platform. So it's really kind of what can you do on the data side to make sure that you're providing the user with either better pricing or a better experience. And so for us, it was difficult because on the grading side, we use AI to grade cards using computer vision, and it's been a tough road because there's so many cards, right? I mean, trading cards have been around since the 1800s and the turn of the century, and so there's so many variations of vintage cards, but then the variation of modern cards is even greater, right? So there's parallels and this and that, and there's like variations of every card. So it's the data, right? Getting enough data set to train the AI is the entire trick of what we're doing, and it's a race. I'll be honest with you, and we're competing against some very big companies, from eBay to Fanatics to collectors, and there's a bunch of companies chasing the golden grail of understanding the data set of every card, right? So that's kind of been the challenge. But in terms of what I see going forward is we're going to use as much deep data as we can. I don't know if I want to call it AI versus just deep data, right? And machine learning, but it's really about what can we do on the consumer marketplace side to make it more fun, make it more engaging. And so can we see chatbot AIs helping people make trade offers and purchasing or growing their collection and making suggestions? Absolutely. And it's all coming. It's just a matter of time.
And on that topic of data, two topics that come to mind are a movement towards a cookie-less future, which results in less accurate data, and data privacy, which results in less accessible data. And so, Dave, maybe going on to you, Tradeswell's analytics are as useful as the quality of the underlying data. And so how do you think merchants will be impacted as regulations around data gets tighter?
Yeah. Even before I get to that, I just want to second what you said. Privacy is the scapegoat, not the problem. Right? So try to resolve Facebook custom audiences to an individual or a household in 2010. The answer is no. Try to do it with Google Search. Try to do it with YouTube. You've never had the opportunity to do it with Amazon or Walmart. And so moving to the merchants, the problems that you have is they're predisposed to thinking about assembling data around households and individuals. That's their core capability, and they think only in terms of assembling consumer journeys. And in the case of Tradeswell, you assemble those consumer journeys to try to identify what actions that you invested in and what actions that occurred will drive true incremental growth, right? That model, A, was always broken because it was always blind to a lot of things, macroeconomics, weather, natural disasters, right? Your broadcast TV. So I look at it not necessarily as a bad thing, I look at it as a force multiplier to a better model, right? So when you want to determine incrementality, frankly, P&G had cracked that 70 years ago with their methodologies. What they didn't have, what we have today, is the orchestration of the data and the automation. You know, the ability to take in a bunch of data, assemble a product graph in a matter of seconds, synthesize data so it all lines up, and then actually run some machine learning to identify probabilistically what actions were actually driving incremental growth in the business. That's hugely valuable, and I would argue it was the right methodology all along. We had a red herring out there by trying to assemble ground up every single. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry, I won't be too wordy, but I sold probabilistic identity for Drawbridge for years. I sold deterministic identity for Newstar. This stuff was not nearly, it didn't have the fidelity, actually, of the models we're producing now, even sans some of those identifiers.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Thanks. And Connor, Disco has collected an insane amount of data set yourself. And can you quantify for us how large that data set is and how merchants can better utilize that data?
Yeah, so we started 2.5 years ago. We work with over 1,000 merchants in the Shopify Big and Woo ecosystems. We have over 70 million US e-commerce shoppers in our pool. Of those folks, if you think about the overall addressable market of e-commerce shoppers in the US, there's about 200 million people that buy things online. About 100 million of those people only shop on Amazon. So we're hitting a pretty critical mass of US e-commerce shoppers across over $25 billion worth of transactions. And then we also have the data between brands, seeing where people go, where they click, what they're looking at. So we're starting to get a much more holistic picture of what people are interested in and where they want to go next. The way that we use this today is through our audiences product. We have a prospecting audiences product that allows brands to use this data set to target new customers. We've built models that actually identify the people that have similar characteristics to the customers that they have, and as such have been able to lower customer acquisition costs significantly on traditional channels like Meta, but are also expanding to other channels that have really bad targeting right now. Think direct mail, think programmatic. All of these places are really dealing with the same identity issue. And as we've been talking about, a lot of it comes to not having the right identifiers and those going away. In the future, we're going to be using this data to give customers a much more holistic understanding of their shoppers. So thinking, if you're a direct-to-consumer brand, like say the Honest Company, you only know the types of baby products that your customers use and the types of things that they do. Most direct-to-consumer brands don't have millions of dollars in data budget to go out and enrich the existing understanding of their customers. So by working together and being part of Disco, we're going to enable brands to also learn much more about their customers, where they shop, where they go, what they do, and the types of things that they're interested in so that they can improve their acquisition and retention efforts.
Yeah, let's stick on the topic of future of AI. And we're already seeing areas being reinvented, like customer service, product recommendation, fraud, and inventory management, just to name a few. And Richard, BlackRose's vision is to democratize AI and machine learning for commerce. Where do you see the greatest potential for impact and perhaps largest use case within commerce?
Yeah, sure. So if you look at, again, going back to good old-fashioned AI from last summer, mostly, what AI is really good for is making sense of huge amounts of data. So there are certain tasks, especially, if you think about commerce, there's, many, many different data sources, but one of the biggest ones and the most critical ones, and this is where we are currently focused at Black Crow, is the streaming user data, meaning the event data that's kicked off by users interacting with brands' digital environments, right? In their mobile web, their app, if you're a TapCart customer, or desktop. And so those events are generating this massive data set. For the most part, brands aren't using it because there's just too much data. So if you can get a handle on it, if you can make sense of it with machine learning, you can actually see into the future of your customers' behavior, their value. In the future, we'll be able to really look into inventory and where stockouts are going to happen, where your supply chain is going to fall apart. And there's so many predictive functions that let people understand the future of their KPIs. So when I think about use cases, it's really, if you go back to like, what are commerce companies, right? They have a product at the center, and then they're a CAC LTV machine. And so when you deploy machine learning against the data you already own as a brand about your users, based on their behavior over time, how they're moving through your purchase funnel. When you deploy that, you can make CAC much, much more efficient. You can lower the costs, identify what creatives and campaigns and channels are actually delivering high-value users for you. And then you can increase the value of having brought someone in front of your customers by using predictive data to figure out what that consumer will be responsive to maintain the length of their subscription, to repeat buy over time. So I really see that as the center. I mean, there's many, many applications for machine learning, but for commerce, it's ultimately about product meets customer, and products is generally happening elsewhere, though there's a lot of product development work happening in AI. And so right now, it's about first-party data, owning it, and understanding your customers more effectively.
And Connor, what about on the consumer side, maybe taking personalization as an example? Help us envision how impactful it could be for the future of shopping.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of remarkable if you think about it today, how bad the shopping journey is in e-commerce. If you go to Amazon and you type in the word candle, you're going to get 100,000 results. Some of them are going to be in really weird scents that you would never put in your home. And it's kind of frustrating as a consumer that you're giving up all of this data and you're telling Amazon everything about you and you're telling Facebook about you, and yet you're still getting really bad results in effect. And I think that the time that consumers have to look at things and find things is minimal, and there's a huge opportunity for that to become more serendipitous and exciting. And I think the thing I liken it to is when you're on like Abbot Kinney and you're walking past a shop that you haven't seen before, and it's delightful, and you're excited that you found it. Now imagine if that existed in your digital world. The closest thing to it today is Instagram, and most people are finding new brands today on Instagram. Of course, it's gotten a lot worse, but we really believe that by providing more of that signal and making it clearer for brands who their customers are and what they're interested in, that we can start to make that more relevant across the internet, especially in the wake of everything that's happened with iOS 15.
Yeah, and we've, in the last 30 minutes, thrown the word CAC around like 50 times. Dave, why is it so hard for brands to measure ROAS, return on ad spend, and why is it so important for the industry to understand, like, why do merchants care so much?
Yeah, we're picking on the same thing, but I just have to say it. Like, one, it feels like we're back to the future here, right? If you look at retail media, there's no centralization of media inventory. There's no universal ad server, and most importantly, performance is reported by the recipients of the $50 billion for the most part. And so if you look at most enterprises, when they assemble up a ROAS metric, they're taking the signal from the people they paid to do the advertising and adding that up and calculating ROAS. So we took 18,000 campaigns run across $5.7 billion of observed GMV, and we have a metric we call IROI, incremental return on investment, and we just looked at the correlation. There's virtually no correlation between ROAS and incremental ROI, and the reason for that is it's not that it's nefarious activities, it's that the ads are so close to the transaction, and the tracking completely ignores every other thing that the consumer has been exposed to. Not to say the least, you're just out of Advil.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's a difficult problem to solve for. That's one that we're heavily focused on, and I wish I could say everything you say as eloquently as you, but I think machine learning is perfect for it.
I can teach you.
Yes, teach me, Yoda. But it's a great problem to bite off, and it's one that I think is acute.
Yeah.
And CAC in isolation is a difficult metric to totally understand. On the flip side of that equation is LTV and retention. Connor, what are some different strategies brands can take on to maximize LTV and retention?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that if you spend any time in the direct-to-consumer ecosystem, or even if you're investing in the direct-to-consumer and e-commerce enablement ecosystem, it was all about customer acquisition, and everything was related to CAC and trying to get as many customers as possible. And in the last year, it's completely shifted to the opposite of what are you going to do to get more money out of the customers that you already have? How are you going to use tools to actually enable you to extract more out of them? And you've seen a proliferation and a growth of platforms like Klaviyo, PostScript, Attentive, Tapcart that are all really helping brands understand more about how to engage with those customers. Where I would say it still isn't great is that brands still are in silos. They only understand what they understand about customers. So what we're really excited about at Disco is to give people a more collective understanding of who their customers are so that that touch point is more personalized. Who in the room has received a text message from a brand that was completely irrelevant? Like everyone. I mean, this morning I think I got a recommendation for a women's swimsuit. As much as I might buy one for my wife, she probably would hate what I got for her, and it's not a relevant thing to show me. And I think there's a lot of wasted media on these own channels that leads to a lot of reduction in customer retention. And I think that the signal that we can give brands to make them understand that better will make that as well work better for brands.
Yep, and Brian, I'd love to talk to you about the future of commerce a little bit. And historically, commerce has been very quick to adopt new forms of tech, whether it's online storefronts or mobile apps or e-wallets and social commerce. And you've obviously have always been at the forefront of the next wave of innovation in commerce. And I'd like to hear a little bit about your perspective on where the market is headed and perhaps the role of crypto, blockchain, metaverse. Talk around those buzzwords have obviously died down, and what are your views on them? Are they here to stay?
Yeah, it's a great question. As many of you probably have figured out, we're in a kind of a weird space right now, right? Where all the iOS changes and all the data issues that all the commerce companies face today that they didn't face 2 or 3 years ago is reaping havoc on e-commerce, right, and direct-to-consumer. And so people are scrambling and turning more towards companies like Disco and Black Crow and everything else to try to figure all this out. Can we crack it in time? I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I think you're going to see a lot of e-commerce companies, a lot of D2C companies, honestly, go by the wayside.
Yeah.
If you can't get profitable, it's a tough environment to raise capital for e-commerce D2C, as you guys all know. And so I think you're going to see a real kind of reckoning, if you will, within the next, call it 6 to 12 months. And we already have a bunch of companies. I also run a venture fund. We see a lot of companies in our portfolio that are struggling, right? It's like, they're not bad companies. They're good companies if they just had a little bit more capital, right? But the capital is just not there for these companies that don't have that type of growth, right? So I think there's going to be a shakeout. I think companies that truly do embrace, data and machine learning and AI will definitely have an advantage. But at the end of the day, we're all looking for that edge, right? We're all looking for that little bit of more data to provide, again, the user experience that you're looking for and the engagement, the LTV, the whatever it is, that one more purchase on that subscription, whatever that might be. But at the end of the day, it's just business. It just is. It's hard to explain, but it's kind of you really want to just build a great business, a great brand, right? There's something to be said about just old school advertising, even, right? I mean, it's like someone asked me, like, do billboards work? I'm like, of course they work, right? For the right companies. If they didn't work, they wouldn't be around.
Right.
They'd be gone, right? It's the same thing with almost any advertising channel. If they didn't work, they would be gone. They've been around for hundreds of years because they work. And so it's a matter of kind of shifting your mindset to, yes, you want to use data in the right way and make smart decisions, but you also want to pay close attention to the user experience, your brand, and making the customer happy at the end of the day. That's what it's all about.
And for the investors in the room, I'd like to sort of touch on what are some of the areas within commerce that we should keep an eye out on as investors? Maybe, whether it's double clicking on something we talked about today or some new areas. Richard, anything you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I'm going to have to vote for artificial intelligence. No, I honestly believe, I think there's certainly product innovation and everyone wants to build a brand and a community, but I do think success and failure is going to be largely a data enterprise, right? It's who is gathering zero-party data, who understands their first-party data, and the more you can own, make sense of, and deploy data, honestly, the better relationship with the customer you can have. And that's ultimately value from a product comes because the brand has a relationship with a person. And the more, for us, personalization is about de-averaging. So the more you can use data to understand and de-average the experience, de-average what the sort order looks like, de-average what the merchandising is, what the discounting and promotions you're putting in front of users are, by something intelligent that makes it more relevant to a particular user, that's what's going to make brands and commerce work.
Dave?
Investors of future commerce. I think, first of all, I agree with a lot what you said. I'm going to steal something that you said, which is you kind of touched on SKU level forecasting, and then you touched on supply chain, and the amount of economic value of getting that right for manufacturers is absolutely massive. And right now, we are in a position where we can quantify the problem, but we haven't yet figured out a solution because there's some very wet spaghetti noodles to push across the table. If you see somebody who comes out with a really elegant solution to bring a little liquidity and then bring the signal into that on the supply chain, you should leap, right? So.
Connor?
I guess I'll go with the shameless plug. We fundamentally believe that the answer to a lot of the problems that exist come from unification of the ecosystem. Brands have been relegating all of their personalization to large platforms like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and there's a way for them to actually band together and leverage the collective data set for the collective benefit, and that's what gets us really excited.
And Brian, I'd like to give you the last word. You've clearly had many successful exits for the founders out there who are building in this current environment, for the brave warriors out there. What advice do you have for founders who are building for long-term success in this environment?
Don't listen to your venture capitalists. Do what's right for your business. That's basically what it comes down to. It's don't look to impress the public. Don't look to impress your venture capitalist partners. Do what's right for your business and for your team and for your customers especially. And just be smart. Be smart with your capital. It's really difficult to raise capital right now, and so whatever you can do to extend runway and get to that kind of break-even level, I would probably be doing now.
Well, that's all for today. Thank you all for tuning in, and a round of applause for the panelists.